Welcome to the Afghanistan Project Podcast. I'm your host, Beth Bailey, and my guest today is John Moses, co-founder of the Massachusetts Afghan Alliance, an organization supporting Afghan allies who've located around Massachusetts. John is also a 23-year veteran of the U.S. Army, a veteran fellow at the Hoover Institution, and the director of operations at Wizard Line Technologies Incorporated. It's great to have you here, John. I'm so excited that we have connected and get to talk about all of the things you've been part of, and I think it's going to be another hard to listen to episode, which I feel like is what I've recorded these days a lot, but really important topics. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, and thank you, Beth. I appreciate it. I think it's safe to say that some of the hard topics we have to speak about, right? And I think these are, when we get to that point, we can talk about, some of the cases that we deal with on the volunteer kind of the local level, and how, reunification and how resettlement is really working out here in the field. So that's kind of what we'll talk about.
I'm so stoked. I'd love to get started. I feel like this is how I start every single episode, but how did you get going in evacuation work? Why did you find yourself in it? Bring me back to the time of the withdrawal and what was going on for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was fortunate enough when I was stationed, when I went to Afghanistan in 2011-12, I actually ended up stationed at the United States Embassy in Kabul. So my battalion ended up putting me in a position there. It was amazing. I was surrounded by Afghans. A lot of people don't know that in most embassies, it's about 70% third country nationals that work there, right? It's the people from Afghanistan. I was also in kind of an odd job where I was alone a lot, and I was kind of on the road, and it was just me and my interpreter, one of two of them. And then, we had these great missions and great kinship, and I got to sit down across the table from Afghans and do all the things in Afghanistan. I had like a real Indiana Jones deployment. It was just a great time to be a new E7 out there in the world, like exploring. And then, 10 years go by, you don't think about Afghanistan a lot, and you see your friend move to the United States and become a citizen and have kids, and you're like, well, that's really part of my past now. I retire from the Army. And then on August 16th, it was actually after midnight by the time I got the message. I got the same message of, thousands of other people got, and it was straight up, Sergeant Moses, can you help me? And it was for his family in Afghanistan because he was in the U.S. And I remember the first response was absolutely, like, tell me what to do. And honestly, I think for me, what really helped was actually the connections at the embassy. So I still knew people in the diplomatic field. I knew people from State Department, and reaching out to those and calling those and just working that network was what really helped. And then it was the same, that same story we all have, right? 2 weeks, no sleep. Made some of the best friends of my life, cried a lot, laughed a lot. And at the end of that, the EVAC fellows, which was my group, which was our group, we ended up getting 68 people out through the airport, we were really grateful to get those people out. And then efforts after the fact, the next 2 years, we were able to help, well over 150 people at this point. But I don't really think we're doing resettlement anymore, so I'm not really doing countdowns anymore. I still have a few families. It's a little more, it's systemic now, how SIVs get out and things like that. But yeah, so we don't really count them anymore. But I think it was a great time, and I learned a lot, and it changed it pivoted my entire life in a whole new direction. This was not what I thought I was going to be doing 23 years ago when I joined the Army.
No, nobody thinks that. It's funny. I joined the intel world right after you left the embassy in Kabul, and it's same thing. I had to put that away. Or actually, I was there. It was right in the middle, basically. I started in 2010. I left in 2013. So right in the middle of that is when you were there, and it was a heady time to be doing that stuff. And then it's like, I gotta put it down. I can't do anything with it. But there are so many people like that. So many people who got touched, even in like the briefest. Well, yours was not brief and yours was very intimate. I would have killed to be in that position that you were in, to be able to be in Afghanistan and be surrounded. That's all I ever wanted to do. And it just touches you. It's a country that touches you, and you can't let it go. And so, it's like a vacuum. You're like, oh, well, I'm back again. And now here you are. So let's fast forward. You get all these people out, you change all these lives. What about starting the Massachusetts Afghan Alliance? What led to the creation of that?
Yeah, that's So for me, I was doing, so one of the challenges I saw is, we were all dealing with, we don't call it evacuation anymore. We call it resettlement, right? So relocation, right? So that's what we call it. That's what I call it with them. I think that's the right term now, right? So we call them, we relocate people. But what I saw is now we're getting, first of all, it's actually, I did want to say, praise to the coalition and the work they're doing, because throughput is up. And I don't love the word throughput. It sounds very not human, but more people are showing up. P1s are showing up in my community. I just gave a P1 his first bus ride today, actually. I think I mentioned that before we came on. Yeah. So I really want to thank the people that are doing the work to keep that speed and the process going. And I do think that's great. But there's always a but. And this has nothing to do with the higher up level of this. At the local level, essentially the federal level pushes money down to, a resettlement agency. They take people, and those resettlement agencies offer a core set of services, which are actually quite rich in Massachusetts. I'm very fortunate to be partnered with International Institute in New England. They're a very well-known, very well-established agency. But there are gaps in that. And it's things like, how do you get somebody to the store, grocery shopping? How do you send somebody their first hot meal? And it is almost entirely driven by volunteers. So we have this stack of volunteers out there that often come in, really hot, ready to help Afghans or Ukrainians or whoever. And then they realize how absolutely difficult the work is. And so what I saw was, at a local level, how do we better support our Afghan allies and the volunteers that support them? Both through programs. We want to do like resiliency programs is one of the things we're working on. And my co-founder, Farisha Shams, who's an Afghan immigrant that came in 2019, she's doing a lot of that. She's planning like Eid events, things like that. But the problem we saw was not enough information. People down here don't really know what goes on, in kind of the halls of Congress, right? That's not what they're following. They're trying to figure out where to buy soap at a good price. So like, there's this whole other world of people, and then they're all kind of disjointed and all over the place. In Concord, Mass, there's IJTF. In this other place, there's this other group. And there are all these groups that don't have good information. So that, and I wanted to be able to support Afghans better with cultural and people programs and resiliency. And then that last piece, which is just really, how do we support the volunteer community? And boy, do they need it.
Tell me about that, because I've talked about that with like Kate Kavarovic, as part of that resiliency assistance with like big Afghan evac,
Yeah.
But how does that work on a local level? What are the issues that volunteers are facing, and what are you coming up with to try to help?
Okay, so resilience at the local level, really, I wouldn't say it's non-existent. What people like IANE want to do, International Institute, and most of the nonprofits, there's some really great ones. There's Cambodian, Massachusetts Cambodians. There's a bunch of different groups out here that are doing this work. But resiliency for the volunteer groups I don't know if it really exists outside of, being in a friend, being in a church, and, a lot of these are church groups, right? A lot of them are, most of the church groups, the demographic is a little bit older too. So you deal with things that are just unspeakable. So I'll start just with the focus with reunification cases. I think we do a great job with SIVs, P1s, and we're doing all the work we need to do for those people. But so typically when somebody comes in into Massachusetts, they get about 6 months of direct services and about 5 years of indirect services through IANE. Most people volunteer for, say, a Ukrainian family, 6 months to a year. They're pretty well off and they're only texting you. A lot of these families who are not Afghanistan veterans, a lot of these volunteers that were out here doing this work ended up with reunification families, where like you have a father and a son, but the wife, the disabled child, and 2 daughters are in Afghanistan. Or another family where, another family makeup like that. So now these families who don't know a lot about Afghanistan, and one of the families is Panjshiri. So one of the very first groups I started helping was just what we call a neighborhood support team. It's kind of like Welcome Corps, which also is great. We can talk about, but and these people like found me and they were like, we don't know what to do. They're like, they have pictures of their uncles getting murdered and like their family members dying, and they're like, and I am just a volunteer. And so when we say resiliency, the resiliency is we talk to each other, I think. It is one of the problems we want to solve at Mass Afghan. So at Mass Afghan, one of the things we want to do is we want to bring volunteers together. We want to be able to go out into different towns and say, hey, you're not alone. Like, we see you. Like, here's some resources you didn't know about. So we're going to do kind of a world tour of our region in Massachusetts. But they deal with really unbelievable stuff that I don't think they ever expected. Let's put it that way. I mean, grown Afghan man crying. Just, I mean, it's not great. And the son's always upset. And they do the thing that a lot of the rescue work, when people start texting you over and over again, where's my family? Can you help with my family? And you can't, right? There's not much to do there. So they deal with all of it. They deal with the best and the worst, for sure.
Yeah. And I bet that in some ways it's like you got to put up that front, right? And not let
Yeah.
it bother you. But like, of course it bothers you. And that's
Absolutely.
just such a, God, like I was listening to Leslie Merriman yesterday talk to me about some of the things with the rape cases she deals with in Afghanistan. And it's like, I'm gonna have to edit parts of my responses out because I was just so angry. And it's like, well, that's not helpful, and like, how as humans do you handle these things that are going on in this country that never should have happened, and that people shouldn't have to hear about their family members dying. And I'd love to just, talk about some of these reunification cases, how people got left behind, how people got split up, just so that someone who's listening who maybe doesn't understand can now have empathy for the situations that Afghans are facing when they get here.
Yeah. So the first family I can talk about is the Pancheri family, the experiences they've had and how they got out. So that particular family was actually at Abbey Gate. It was the whole family, the father, the son, and they had a very disabled son that was barely mobile, and they carried him down to Abbey Gate and thought they were going to try to get him out. And then anyway, they were this whole family, and then Abbey Gate explodes, the world changes, and the son and him were mildly wounded, but blood everywhere kind of thing, and they got pulled into the gate by the medics, by the same medics that were treating the Marines. And the family got separated, documents got blown up. They never saw, which was the first part of trying to get, which is actually how I met the family, because volunteers on the ground, which this is not as much of a problem now, but at the time, passports, I was the guy in Massachusetts who knew to get passports. And that was my only thing. And that's how I started meeting people. But that's how he got sucked in. He got pulled in and he got here. And, I met him about a year after he got here. Somebody in the school was like, hey, there's a guy, John, I'm on the school committee in town. They were like, get John Moses, that guy. He works with Afghans all the time. And that's how I met him. And the other family was a bus driver. So the bus driver, his son and nephew both got out of the airport on their own, which is just absolutely wild. Got into the airport. And then this other gentleman was driving the bus, and they said, you better not go. And he found out his son was on this side of the gate, and his nephew, and they all got on a plane. Wild story about the nephew, though, because he was an unaccompanied minor. So when they got to Qatar, I always say it wrong. I'm from Boston. I get to say it however
you can say it whichever way.
Yeah.
Intelligent people say it both ways, so I just do whatever.
Yeah. Well, they lived in a child village, like a village full of Afghan children. I didn't know this part of the story. I'm not there, right? I didn't know. And they were like, it was the best time. It was like nothing but kids, and there was no adults allowed because for a bunch of reasons, probably. Yeah. But I was like, I'm just glad it didn't turn into like Lord of the Flies or something,
That would be so bad.
Yeah.
Wow.
But that young man actually came here unaccompanied, though. So he was here by himself. But his uncle ended up living with his uncle. But so he was an unaccompanied minor.
He's lucky that he had his uncle, because I remember back in the day hearing a horror story or 5 about a group of Afghan children relocated to Detroit. Oh. And some of the things that were going on in the place where they were being kept that were just bad. And I wish I could remember specifics right now, but I'd love to hear more. I've tried to gather information about child reunification cases specifically, and it's really hard to find specifics. So if you're able to tell some of those stories, are there children who are still separated from their families? I know there was a big drive to bring families over.
Yeah.
About a year and a half maybe ago, because it was stopping the flow of like regular processing as they were trying to get these. And I had a family that was stuck in Qatar.
Those are really
real freaking pissed.
Waiting. When you're waiting for people to come out of CAS, the locations now. It's that long, slow wait. That particular young man, he came down. He actually he's a senior in high school now. He was a sophomore when he got here. which is a little bit crazy. But so when he got here, he was very fortunate to have his uncle. We knew that. I don't know of any other unaccompanied cases around me, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. I know of about 7 or so reunifications that are still active near me. His case, thank God, and thanks to the work of a whole bunch of people, was able to make that reunion with his family. So, which was great. Now, again, we can point back though to the volunteers now, right? So we've been helping this young man for 3 years, and then his family showed up probably about 6 months ago, which restarts the clock. So what ends up happening is we get a lot of volunteers, and then about 6 months in, they're like, this is brutal. Like, this is absolutely like, how do you get rides places? How do you teach an Afghan how to drive? What do you buy him at the supermarket? Where do you get halal meat? Like all these crazy things. And not everybody has, the patience to kind of stick with it. There are some heroes out there, though. There's this woman, Terry, that lives in Harvard, Mass., not the college. It's a town, beautiful little idyllic place. She was supposed to get 2 Afghans that were supposed to be reunified. So she got the 2 that was going to be reunified, and then ended up with 20 more people in this tiny little town. And she's taking care of them, found them a place with no rent for 2 years. She's been really doing it. They just graduated high school down there. Afghans are doing amazing things, man. Afghans absolutely sent their best. And these kids, to go back to him, he reunited with his family. It starts the clock over for the volunteers, which is hard, but it's also joyous, right? You don't have to be happy to be full of joy. So I'm super happy for him, and we've been doing a lot of work for that family. But we just did what the thing said. We filled out the forms. We if they asked for anything, updates, we sent the updates. And then one day he got the care call. I think the biggest surprise for us, though, and I don't know if this is still true, timelines change all the time. That particular family, when they got to CAS, they were there for almost 7 months. So there was a whole nother waiting period where we actually, because I knew SIVs that were getting out fast, we were like, oh, they're going to be here any day. Find an apartment. We're doing all this work. And then they were like, just kidding. So that was kind of just, how I learned a little bit about the reunification process, though. Wild stuff.
It's got to be hard. I imagine, though, there are some silver linings there. I mean, a younger person probably adapts more easily to a new environment, and then can help their family adapt to that new environment. So it's almost like an aid and assistant in some ways. But I just can't imagine for these cases like the ones you mentioned with like women being stuck in Afghanistan right now. What's that like for a man to know that his wife or female children are in a place where the Taliban run their existence, and they can't leave their home because they don't have a male chaperone, and they can't, just what is that like?
It's everything. It's every nightmare. And I don't want to discount moms, but for a dad that's here, I am incredibly empathetic, because I can tell you, when I went to Afghanistan, my daughter was 1. I came back, but I could talk to her all the same, not the same thing at all, but I could talk to her, like I could see her. And that year, I remember constantly like looping in my mind, right? Like along with all my other things going on in my head. But I always remember being like, wow, this time doesn't come back. And this guy's been doing it for 3 years. So, just a few weeks ago, we have like a group meeting. He's like, I need to talk to everybody because I really need to get my family out. He's not doing great. He's not doing great, right? And you can see it on his face, and you can see the stress, and you can see him chewing on it. And, just a few weeks ago, his daughters didn't make it to school in time or something. They were late for school or weren't going to school. And the Taliban arrested a bunch of like kids that were too old. So they went into a school and they arrested a bunch of students, girls, and then took them out. And the only reason that their family wasn't there. Now imagine being, a bazillion miles away, and your daughter just missed the Taliban arrest party, and there's nothing you can do to protect your family. And then his wife has surgery, right? So his wife has a really major surgery, and he sends pictures to the volunteers of his wife, like, and you're like, we know, man, we're trying, like, they just beg a lot. And, you just try to, I mean, I'd fly through a wall for any of my kids. I just can't imagine my family being so far and so untouchable. So, but we're working on it. Today we actually got a positive call. We got a phone call for that family, to make sure they update their documents. So hopefully that, all my families are documentally complete at this point now. So I'm just hoping to get them on a plane.
Nobody in your group has been affected by all these SIV. God, what's the word that I'm looking for? The calm denials and things like that. I've always wondered stateside if that. I know it's
No,
happening stateside, but you haven't seen. Yeah, I
I
wondered.
just haven't seen it. I don't deal
Yeah.
with legal stuff a lot. I think legal is its own kind of in immigration. I'm not an immigrant. I'm an immigration person that knows enough.
Mhm.
Um, so I think, um, yeah, I think it's better left to experts. Is I guess the way
Yeah.
I would say, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I just wonder because it's like if you have your comm revoked and you're
Yeah,
here, like what the
I
hell
have no
happens,
idea.
you know? And like if
I
you
have
have your
no idea.
family, I just can't even. I've heard some really bad stories about things that are ongoing right now. And that's the thing is like there's just the layers of crap that
Yeah,
Afghans have to wade through. And it's not just their family, right? We in America think of our family as like the four people who live under your household, right? Like
yeah,
it's and yes, I think about my extended family too, but they're not, you know, they're not under my roof with me and it's not the same intertwined kind of thing. And so you've
right.
got one family here with this set of issues who is deeply tied to this set
Yeah,
here with these issues. And I mean, just imagine the mental health fiasco that
yeah.
is going on for Afghans right now because all they know basically is
Yeah.
just trauma,
There,
various kinds of trauma all happening at once.
yeah, and I say this all the time. We're at 3 years, right? We're at almost 3 years, and there is no resettlement without your mom or your dad or your sister
Mm-mm.
or your brother. Resettlement doesn't happen. So we try to take them out to do fun thing. One particularly the Pancheri family who's had a really rough experience back home with family members and all the things that happened. The
Oh,
family's
yeah.
in Kabul now, but that particular family, he is just, we can't, hey, let's go get some kebab. Let's go get some kobli palau. Let's go do, and he's like, I don't eat if my family doesn't eat. Like I'm not going to eat. And then he just works and works and works. And now he's injured himself. And then this week, all of the families, because they all arrived at the same time, unbeknownst to all of the volunteers, all of their insurance expired on the same time, and they all got hurt a week later. And now we have to figure out how to let.
Oh,
So this is crazy stuff, and they're like, oh my god, I owe somebody $5,000. How do I pay that? And I'm like, we're gonna have to figure it out. So it's crazy. And
oh.
Massachusetts is actually great. It's a great resettlement state. I hope more people come here. Everybody gets mass health for 2 years, and then they get a ton of good support out here. So
That's really incredible. There are so many people who try to move mountains. And I mean, if you're a US citizen, you have a lot more things that you can do to move
yeah,
mountains. I had one good friend, he's been on the podcast, who is a US citizen from the SIV program, and he
yeah,
flew back to Afghanistan to force the hand of the State Department and get his parents out and
wow,
couldn't get his siblings out. Oh, yeah. And this is a man who is just like scarred from surviving a suicide bombing
wow,
when he was an interpreter and just, I mean, in a coma,
oh
couldn't see, had to relearn how to walk, just and when you bear those scars, the Taliban know you did something and it's
yeah,
not, you're not one of us,
yeah,
and
yeah,
he took that on because he's like, my dad is gonna die of
yeah,
mental health trauma. His dad was an NDS colonel, I want to say, or something like that.
yeah,
He was high ranking in the NDS, and so he was terrified that they were going to
yeah,
try to kill him again because they tried to kill him, during the previous 20 years. So
yeah.
he's like, hey, I got to do this. But when you're an SIV applicant, you don't have that. Like,
Can't do
you
that.
don't have the
You're a green
ability to
card holder.
go.
You can't do that. You can't do it.
Yeah, you can't. Right. That would probably put that at risk. And it's just, but I can see people, I can imagine
I
people
can
trying to
imagine
do
people would
it.
do it. I mean, there's not a small chance that I wouldn't get on a plane and like risk myself for my family. They don't have that option, but
Yeah.
I just hope that I don't think reunification cases specifically, and this is one of the things Mass Afghan wanted to help with. We really wanted to focus on these reunification families because of the resiliency support, because of the volunteer resiliency piece of it. And all of those kinds of things. So we wanted to kind of build that. The reunification cases, I've heard the statement made many times that I wish I never left Afghanistan, right? These guys weren't necessarily in danger. They could have just probably lived their lives and just kept their head down. Reunification cases do not get, I feel like, the right amount of attention across the whole system, right? And I know we have these kind of layers of how everybody is, there's a structure, there's an order. And I think everybody understands if you're an SIV and you're an interpreter, you're number one. It goes down the list. But somewhere down on the bottom here are these reunification cases who have these spectacular resiliency needs that have a huge offsize effect on the local community, not just the resettlement agency, but your actual people in the community that are going down there and doing the work every day, because it just extends on. There's not enough communication, I don't feel. That gentleman getting the call today from a human being was probably his entire year. And I hope that leads to the next thing. But, I've gotten to that point before, and that, some of those families are still there. SIVs, P1s, they do a lot of hard time, right? They do a lot of hard time, but a lot of that time they get to do together. And these reunification cases are never healing because they're not able to suffer through this together. So, I mean, if I could see something, I would love to see like a specific communication chain for them from State Department or the care team. I would love to see, just some kind of broader care or a higher percentage of people getting out. I mean, it's obvious that some reunifications are getting out. And from what I've seen, they're generally the unaccompanied minors. Just the wake reunification leaves behind it is just great. It's just really great. It's so much greater than that little piece of it. So not the little piece, because that's the biggest piece. It's the family. So
yeah. Oh, I cannot imagine what it would feel like to be separated for that long with that much uncertainty and terror. I saw one picture, because usually we hear about just the Taliban killing, the people who worked for us.
Yeah.
And I mean, the things that they're doing sometimes to people's kids. I saw one little girl, two little girls in the same picture, and they had their hands cut off at the forearms.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how? And then Leslie Merriman in the show from probably going to be last week by the time that I figure out how this is all going to work out. But, talking about they would rape little girls in front of the parents or like small children. And it, these are not normal people who have taken over that country. And that just tells you, when somebody says, I wish I'd never left Afghanistan, just how bad this feels for them. And I think it's an important thing. There are just so many people, and I've said this on the podcast a couple of times now, I think there's the feeling that we're just like, oh, well, you just want to come to America. You wanted to come to America. Of course you did. No. Afghans love their country. They love their country, and they don't love the Taliban, and they don't want to die. And that is constantly a theme of what's happening. We saw with, I'm sure you heard about Retrograde.
Yeah.
Like a month after Retrograde came out, they killed the guy, Justin Bieber.
Yeah.
And I remember when that came out, and I'm like, wow, all those people, I guess they all must have gotten out. Their faces are all there, and it's horrid. I think we just don't really understand the full extent of what this is and how it's impacting people.
I think, I'm still kind of at a point where I'm not sure if we've, as a country, have taken responsibility for Afghan evac. I mean, outside of this like face-to-face work, after the evacuation of Afghanistan at the State of the Union address, the president didn't mention Afghanistan ending, right? And I remember that very clearly. Like, I felt like, over the past few years, it's really hands off, right? I think policy-wise, I think we're doing what we have to do, and I think we're doing it within the, the boundaries of the law. And I don't think I think those things are great. I definitely don't feel like, outside of that, I will say, my Democratic Congress members have been amazing. Like, they've been amazing. Yeah. We're all over those guys and girls. But I definitely feel like we have some atonement to do. And I don't think, I don't necessarily, even outside of politicians, have we looked at ourselves as a country? Because usually what I hear when we talk about this is, it's Joe Biden's fault, or it's like, it's Trump's fault. Well, you know what? It's really kind of an American war, right? It's the longest war ever, right? It's the longest war in the history of the United States, through multiple administrations of multiple parties, and voters kept it on the ballot and just kept letting it go, right? So we did this, and we chose this through elections and through voting and through all these other things. And I think someday, I hope we're all part of that, there'll be some kind of reckoning for the damage we did to those people, to the people of Afghanistan. And I think that's what we're trying to fix here. That's what Mass Afghan wants to do. I know we can't be Afghanistan, but we can be a place where Afghans can show up and they can have an Eid event, right? They can come in and they can have, an event for kids. They can come in and be part of the community. They can be seen. In my community, I'm on the school committee, and one of the things they asked for and we got was make sure Nowruz and Eid are on the calendar, the school calendars. And I was like, that's great. And we did it because it made them feel seen. So I just think we need them to land here. We need better support for the volunteers, which is what we want to do, and better support for getting them together in the same place. And these reunification cases, I harp on. I'm going to see my congresswoman next week again to talk about reunification cases. This time I'm actually bringing one of the family members because I think they need to see, like, there's got to be some kind of adjustment here with reunification. And there might be things in the plans I don't know about. And I hope that's the case. And I hope they all get the phone call tomorrow. And then I can come in and do a correction and be like, never mind, they're all good. But
I have like 5 things that made me think to say. And the first one is, I want people to imagine this. Like, one of the first things I read about Afghan relocation, being resettled here, is that Afghans do better in places where there are other Afghans who share their culture. I mean, it's such a basic thing, right? And I actually had a conversation with somebody about this who is Afghan, and he's like, yeah, but we have to like start adopting Americanism. And like, yeah, I don't disagree. That's what we all do, right? It's the melting pot and you slowly acclimate.
Yep.
But you're not going to come out of 2021 withdrawal and acclimate right away. It is a big change. You've gone through a massive destabilizing moment. Once again, let me bring up trauma. And then imagine that you're seeing all these families coming together.
Yeah.
Your family isn't there. And this has never been brought up on this podcast. I'm just really grateful that you brought it up, and I'm thinking about it because you're right. It is the wake. I picture it, the feeling of like, you want to be with your community, but you're watching everybody else with their family and their loved ones, and knowing that at least at the end of the day, they're under the same roof. And yes, it might be leaking, and it might be that there's not enough money, but they're all together, and at least there's that certainty. So I really hope, I would love to be able to write about this too. I think that's something that we'll have to talk about.
Yeah, we could talk more about it for sure. I mean,
it's
I'm really impressed with the resiliency they do have. Man, I bet you this poor guy wants to smack this right out of my face. But sometimes I'll be like, man, I know this is hard, but you got to practice sabar, which is patience, right? It's like biblical patience. And I feel like that poor guy. He tells me to be patient one more time, one more time. And like, I'm just doing the best I can. I think they all think they do the thing that everybody that's trying to save their family does. And they just do anything that seems to make sense. And I'll just give you a brief little example. Sometimes they let us look in their phones, and he wanted to show me the care email, the original one where we like sent back the documents. And I didn't expect this. And it actually really affected me in a profound way. He had been replying to the care email, "Where's my family?" Like, not once, not twice, but there was just this line, like, and it's an automated, you're right, it's like an automated email, and you're like, and he sends it to the care, and they'll send the document really complete. I think the communication stream has to be better for those families, especially the children. I think that's the other thing, is these children are separated from their siblings and their moms or their dads, not just unaccompanied, but there's also two Afghan kids, men now, are going to graduate from my high school next year. And they got here when they were sophomores. Like, what a responsibility we've given to the communities. And I think Mass Afghan really wants to solve that landing. So at least here, maybe not everywhere, because it's hard everywhere, these Afghans can land and have a community, they can have a leader in the community. We're trying to find some Afghan leaders to like take over. We're like, you guys are. So it's been a lot of fun. Yeah.
I love, that's something that I noticed with like React DC when I interviewed them, is they are absolutely empowering Afghans to lead. And that eventually you'll absolutely be able to do that. But it's like you got to build up to that, and everybody's trying to figure out this new life. And I know one thing, I didn't have this down to talk about with you, and in fact, I was going to go somewhere else, but let's go here first.
All right, let's do it.
All of these Afghans who are coming here, they had a job in Afghanistan. How many of them are able to go do that job here? Like what percentage?
So far, 0. That's not even realistic. I think they get here. Your first thing is you get a crappy apartment. You go to the crappy apartment. You complain about the crappy. Well, so volunteers help a lot with this. We do all the cleaning. We do all the setup. But some of the apartments are just not great, right?
Yeah.
So they come here. They get an apartment, and the first thing is, I need a car. And you're like, you are months away from a car because you got to do a license test. You got to do this and you got to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So most people, they work either at a supermarket, which is, there's one that they'll hire a lot of Afghans. There's a bunch of dudes that work at the ketchup factory. Ketchup factory seems to be popular. There's a lot of Afghans there. We have great programs in Massachusetts. If you're under 25, there's this great Job Corps site down at Devens, Mass, which used to be Fort Devens. It used to be a military base. And they actually have a training/education track where they can come in, Afghans can come in and they can train for 3 years in plumbing or office work or whatever. But most people are not doing. One of the guys I got out of evac, we helped get out, we called him Dr. Rafi. And Dr. Rafi got out and went to California. He was a doctor. And then for months, he worked in a box factory, like almost a year, I think. He was like, this is the worst. And it was like, it's probably why he went to medical school.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it's the first Afghan family I ever met. It was in 2008. Was it? Yeah. No, I'm sorry. It was spring of 2009. And it was my friend's dad's interpreter who had helped him in Operation Anaconda.
Yeah.
Right. And they were like going to kill him. And they had gotten on the plane and there was no SIV program that was going to help him. There was nothing. And he was living in Alexandria in a high-rise apartment with his multiple children and wife in this tiny space. And he was a doctor. He had been a doctor and he was driving a taxi.
Yeah.
And he was so grateful though to my friend's dad that he had all of the girls. So I was at William & Mary and I was doing a semester where like we all would have an internship and do our studying and those things had to, be the same kind of field. And they invited all of us girls over to have a dinner with them. And we all sat on the floor of their apartment. And I mean, it's just like, taxi driver, you're making good tips or whatever, but like he was trying to go to school too.
Big stretch. They try to do it all. They're like, I'm going to live it all right now because I'm here. I feel like that too. It's
incredible. And he didn't have any avenue of getting, in fact, Chris gave me his packet. He's like, here's his packet. Can you take it? I was working for DOJ doing Nazi hunting of all things, like trying to find Nazis who'd come here under false pretenses and said that they didn't commit genocide, but in fact they did. And that was the part of the DOJ that I was interning with. And he's like, can you take this to your leader? Because like, maybe he can help. And I did. And he's like, there's nothing I can do here, And of course there wasn't, but everybody was just pounding every door bit of pavement to try to find a way. So he didn't get sent back. I mean, what the hell would have happened if he had gotten sent back? It would have been heinous. So, but he was just grinding it out. And that's the thing that happens is these people come here with these amazing careers back in Afghanistan. And you either, you got to find a way to do all those things at once. Like you said, it's, or like my friend Passoon is the man I mentioned before with all of the scars. He's been on the podcast. That's why I feel comfortable naming him because he came out and named himself, but to support his dad, and even his uncles. He never told me that part, but he said it on the podcast that he was also supporting his uncles who were stuck. He was supporting like 3 different families. Yeah. His dad needed multiple safe houses because they had some intel about where the raids were going to be. And so they would move his dad between safe houses, which is just wow. But he was working as a security guard and then driving Lyft or Uber on the weekends, and he had not had a day off in like a year. And like his kids needed dental care, everybody needed things, and he's like, no, I got to keep people alive. And he never asked, I never had him ask me for help, not once. I wouldn't have been able to provide it, but he just wanted somebody to hear his story. That's all he cared about, is like, somebody needs to help my family. And when I couldn't help him and talking about his story didn't help him, he got on the goddamn plane.
I love that.
And he went to Kabul.
That's some chaos
seriously,
right there.
He's writing his book with somebody, and I was really bummed that I didn't just have like massive supplies of money to be able to write his book and take time off, because that man has just the most amazing story.
Maybe you could submit it forward.
Needs to.
Submit it forward.
Yeah, just a forward. Come on. Hey, anybody out there? Like, I'll just I would write that in a heartbeat. When I first heard his story, like I stopped everything. I think I took like 5 pages of notes, just nonstop, because it's like, holy shit, Passoon.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's everybody. Everybody who comes here has that kind of a story, because what they've gone through in 20 years is incredible. And what they continue to go through now and hear about from all these different sources, the Afghan network of information. Is just amazing. Well, okay, let's go back. You're talking about, you get this crappy apartment. You have to do all this. I want to talk about something we talked about before we started recording, the loss of dignity.
Oh yeah.
That you're facing. Let's talk about that, because that's also something nobody had ever really brought that up in such a, I don't think anybody's brought it up. So let's talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, we, on this podcast, you have a lot of people that are very self-sufficient and, able to accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish and live, normal human lives, right? People want to be accomplished, be able to do things on their own. And one of the things that you really find, just, even with just regular resettlement, but especially with reunification, is that they lose dignity, right? So imagine not being able to. So I picked somebody up today and he's like, I wish I could just go to the supermarket to feed my kids, right? But no, I have to wait for a volunteer. And I know they're grateful. It's not that they're like, they have a bad attitude about it. But, and on a deeper scale, like think about somebody like my poor bus driver friend or my friend from Panjshir, where, talk about not being able to protect your family. Like, and being an Afghan man, not being able to protect your family, right? The Taliban occasionally knocks on the door to check on things. You're not, the man of the family is not there to do his part in the community. So, yeah, I think dignity is a big part of that. You lose autonomy, you lose the ability to make choices. You get all this money sometimes for resettlement, and then you're like, wow, I have a lot of money, and then it's just all gone because you need an apartment, right? And then to be a resettlement, and then you have this, volunteer corps that hopefully can raise money for you, right? So all these different groups, which Falcon Corps, NSTs, they all require you to raise money. So maybe you have some people there to help you. But even still, I mean, you're just relying on other people, right? And it takes a while. And I think that's why, a regular case, whether they're here for a year and they finally have a car and they're doing all the things they want to do are great. My other families are doing that too, but it doesn't matter because they're like, I just want my family. Like, I don't care about money. I don't care about, Right. But the loss of dignity is real. I mean, I've seen grown men cry. I've seen, I've just today I get messages every day from one of the kids, almost every day and night, and it's just like, please tell me about my family. Can you help me with my family? And I'm like, kid, I got no answers, man. Like, what I do is we sit with them and we tell them, we're like, you're the man of the house right now. You're doing a great job, right? You're going to be the leader when your family gets here. Like, you're the one that's going to have to help you keep helping your dad, which is really hard to put on a kid. We do that on the kids a lot. Can you translate? I need you to help with bills. Like, it's brutal. And, but you need them. Yeah. So yeah, can't imagine not being able to pay your own bill. I can't even pay my own rent. Like,
or just figuring out how to navigate all these different things. Like I was bringing up before we started how do you get your electric bill transferred over to a new place, or how do you get cable, or like, what do you do to go get your license renewed, and all these like little things that, I mean, dude, going through divorce, you have to redo all that shit. And it is like every freaking week, I'm like, something new. But I know how to navigate those systems. I've done it before.
Right. You've done it before.
Right. So it's like, and if I can't figure it out, I can call 100 people who have done it before. Right. And it's not like, oh, wow.
Oh, we do.
New thing.
Some of the stuff we
do,
it's the mundane stuff that gets you the craziest, right? So, a good example is we had a family. They, we found them an apartment. The apartment's a good friend of mine. And one day the landlord calls me. He's a great friend, and he was like, "I'm going to do this for you." Like, I literally just run at people, and I'm like, "You need to give me your apartment," but whatever. So we get this apartment. They move in, and he's like, USOB, like da 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 da. I'm like, "What happened?" And essentially, they had used the wrong laundry detergent. They used it was like an 8B washer, like a brand new washer, and they were using like this rock based stuff from like Foodland, which is like a halal shop. And, and it just clogged everything up. And then they were dumping grease in the sink. So everything, it was just a mess. And so little things like that are the craziest stuff you deal with. You're like, things you didn't know could be a problem. Like, one day the kid was throwing away trash in somebody's dumpster. I didn't know I couldn't throw it away in somebody's dumpster. And it's like, crazy stuff. And then schools, you got to have them get enrolled in schools. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of travel. Schools is one of the big things we deal with on the volunteer side for sure.
That would be tough too. And I mean, I'm sure you saw the story that I saw of the young boy who hung himself, the young Afghan boy who hung himself because he was getting bullied. And I covered another story. The family, the uncle was killed in the drone strike in Kabul, and they moved the family over here, and part of them at least are in Rochester. And the boys were getting bullied by this little gang in the neighborhood that doesn't go to their school. But the guy contacted me, and we had to have an interpreter because he wasn't somebody who, spoke English because he was an interpreter. He was brought here because his brother was killed in a U.S. drone strike. Not when he was, anyway, the point is, he was afraid to send his kids to school because he had pictures. He showed me the pictures of this gang outside with knives. And he showed me a picture of one of the knives that the boys dropped outside the house, but they would just sit there and wait for these boys to get off the bus so that they could, or the one boy that they were really picking on. And it's like, because he's other, right? And so it's easy. And it's abhorrent that we have to do something, like all of us as a people. The reason that this podcast exists, and I've said this multiple times, is because somebody who used to be my neighbor told me he didn't think that Afghans should be in this country no matter what they did to help us. And I called Michael Cook the next day. I said, we're doing this. We're doing the podcast because people need to understand this is not I'm coming to America for free things.
No.
It's escaping, and it still is trauma, and it still is terrible, and it is our duty to help.
I agree. I think, and I make that case a lot with people. I think how I usually phrase, there are people that don't want to support Afghans, and I'm like, well, that's great, because for 20 something years, you put those bumper stickers on your car, like support the troops. Well, here's your goddamn chance. Here's how you support the troops. From the people that went to Afghanistan obviously care and love these people. And so when people like me or other people in the community go out and speak, you'll often hear them talk about that, right? Like, we're veterans and we chose them as much as they chose us. And again, as a country, over 20 something years with our votes and, the people we chose for office and the decisions that were made and the policies that were made, at the end of it all, we made a choice to become close to the Afghans, right? We made a choice as a country to become close and to make, for the Afghans to become close to us. And then just the endearing nature of the Afghan people and the love they can have for not just their family, like for the people around us. Like, it is not fair, nor is it responsible for like a citizen that was part of all that to be like, I just don't want to deal with it. Well, then take the bumper sticker off your car and stop offering me Applebee's appetizers, because like, for real, like just stop. Don't pretend you like veterans anymore, because like you don't. Right.
Look at the moral injury of all the people who served there, it has had a massive impact. And what I love about moral injury recovery is that doing acts of service is a great way to do that. But, we can't just put this on veterans who already gave so much. Like, we all have to kind of figure out how to open up. And I say that as somebody who isn't doing that in her everyday life. I don't go out and find Afghans in my community. Now, if I knew some in this area that I'm in that's very non-diverse, like, I would absolutely be doing that. But you have to, it's very easy to say. It's very hard to do, like you've seen with volunteers who stick around for 6 months and can't handle the tragedy load that then they're having to take on. Like, this is just a very difficult.
Right.
It's very difficult. What do you think are, I am clearly not in this. So what are things that we didn't discuss that you think need to be said? I know you brought up Welcome Corps.
I did. Earlier. Yeah. So I'm a that experience has been really good. So, it was I'm a member of like 2 NSTs, which are neighborhood support teams, but I'm like, cool. But on this particular team, on this Welcome Corps team, I'm what I call the 5th member, because I do so many other things, but, it has gone fast. I don't want to say where it is, but it has gone faster than I expected by far. Like, I was blown away by like how the timeline has gone up to this point. And up until at least the end of the month, if you have a veteran on your team, they'll plus up. I forget how much it is, the money, So if anybody's going to make a Welcome Corps team before the end of the month, get your paperwork done, get all the stuff done, get at least one. I know we have 1 million veterans, but it'd be better off having teams of 4 civilians and 1 veteran and spread the love out.
There
So
you
you
go.
have a veteran. So we have a team that one of our volunteers, Jess, who's a phenomenal volunteer, she's a veteran. I was like, do you mind just being a 5th member on a team? So we go out and actively seek 5th members now. We're like, let's get them on teams. But awesome program so far. Really impressed with the work everybody did, and it's really filtered down. And if this family gets out on the Welcome Corps team, it's actually the family of one of my co-founders. We're really hoping that it works. We really are.
So let's talk about how that works, because the last time I really looked into Welcome
Yeah.
Corps was when they were first doing it, and you could not sponsor an Afghan at that time.
Yeah.
It was like only people in certain
Yep.
groups. So now you can sponsor. Is it P1, P2? Is that how that works?
I think
Or
you
what
can
are the
sponsor. I'm not an expert on it. I was the 5th member, but I think you can sponsor any Afghan that you know personally that you're willing to sponsor and raise the money for outside of Afghanistan. There's like a list of countries you can't be in, and Afghanistan's one of them. So it's like for Pakistan or India,
Okay.
like right, yeah, kind of. It's places they can get to an embassy because they have to do interviews and all that.
Right.
So
Right.
they go through, and the gentleman Saeed that set this all up essentially said, he sets up an account. There's all these trainings. If you're the sponsor, you have to do write-ups. It's a lot like a lot of the other paperwork we have to do. He nominates other members. You go through a background check, which is also a thing I like. You get at least some kind of minimum security on it. And then, and then I didn't have to do anything. He did the rest. And it was like, and then at the end of it, he said, hey, this is how much money we raised. This is how much money Welcome NST gave us. And it's putting his family in a position to be really well off when he gets. It's not going to be still going to be hard. Doesn't matter how much money you get. There's never enough money. And but it'll be really helpful. The work all those people have done up there it's good stuff.
That's amazing. So it sounds different than what I had expected of that. I thought that you had to basically say, I will support you for 3 years after you get here. But it's just this, you raise the money for them to have.
No, I think there's more to it. Like I said,
Okay.
5th member here. I am pretty sure
Yeah.
Saeed has said something about this 3 year. He said something about a commitment.
By the way, you're on the hook for the next 3 years.
Yeah, I'm on the hook for a lot of groups. I'm on the hook for Chelmsford Afghan Coalition, for the Littleton High Rock team. There's like a whole bunch of them out here.
Wow.
So I am, but they do good work. And the thing is again, we get back to why did I form Mass Afghan? I want to be a force multiplier, right? What I've realized is the volunteer community is disjointed. They're not together. Like, how do we spread best practices? How do we, work on resiliency? How do we work on these things? And what Mass Afghan will be able to do. And we're actually in good conversations now for some MOUs for some large organizations that we're talking about how we solve the volunteer problems. We're talking about locations. We're talking about doing stuff really local work that will impact that community in a positive way. I hope.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's like so many of these groups started the same way yours did. Somebody in evac, right? And then a lot of them, like when I talk to React DC, they're like, oh yeah, we had groups that were in that area, because DC has been a mecca for Afghans for some time, because it's just such a great place to live. It's just expensive.
Yeah.
But you can tap into all these things. You can get all this information, and it helps to coalesce a group. But if you can share that information across different places, because you can't have everybody come to Northern Virginia anymore.
Absolutely.
It's just not. Yeah. And people need to be spreading out, but also the lessons learned and best practices. Like, I can just,
well,
I'm so excited.
Well, React DC is one of the analogs we've looked at. So we've looked at a few different, we're doing some stuff that React does. They do a great job of it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to do as well as they do, but some of the things they do, we want to do. There's another group out in the Midwest that we found that is doing some really interesting stuff with, I'll tell you, like, one of the things we really want to do, volunteer supply chain. So volunteers spend a shitload of money on cleaning supplies and this supply and that supply. And what we want to do is be able to give away that we can provide supplies, both cleaning, house, apartment, minor repair stuff to these volunteers. So they're not spending out of pocket constantly, because they spend a lot of money. So
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that, like, anytime you need to turn an apartment over, you gotta do those things. So that's awesome.
There's weird problems like storage for furniture, right? So you can't do furniture donations ahead of time because they have no place to put them, none of the resettlement agencies. So what about warehouse space so we can pre-measure furniture before we bring it to apartments? Because that's a real pain in the ass when it doesn't go right. It's just a little bit of organization on how things are run. It's really like adding support and not management, but essentially some structure for the volunteers, I think.
Sure, taking away the more you can take off their plate to enable their success, the better. Like take away those small things that really aren't small. It's like you said, the biggest problems are like those little things.
The everyday thing costs hours and hours and hours. Like writing letters to the government and going to, talking to my congresswoman, all 15-minute tasks. Got to get somebody on a bus. It's a half a day, right? It's like, see you later. I'll see you in the afternoon.
Oh my gosh. But I'm just glad that you're doing this. This is really important work. So, John, I want to close out tonight by giving you the opportunity to talk about what you think needs to happen going forward. You've seen this through from when we left Afghanistan until, now, almost 3 years later. What do you think? Is there something we can do to kind of tie this all and make sure that we're making what we did worthwhile?
Yeah, I think it's important to know, we went through this before. This isn't, history does repeat itself. We did this in Vietnam when the Vietnam veterans left. And there's a whole slew of things that happened after Vietnam to our veterans that took 30 years to really find any kind of peace. And we, as a country, don't have to make that mistake twice. We absolutely don't. We don't have to do it to our veterans of Afghanistan, and we don't have to do it to the allies that have kind of been left with the bag that remains. And, how do you do that? How do you support us? How do you actually go through and make our veterans generation better? You do things like pass Afghan Adjustment Act. You do things like supporting Afghan programs. You do that by donating to Afghan charities. And, you do that by attending events in your town. And you do that by being an American and welcome these people to the country because we care about them and so many other people do. So I think if I was going to ask for anything, that would be it. Just do more. Be active as a citizen and understand that this is how you help veterans. Yeah,
I think that I know so many people who have been pushing for the AAA for such a long time and it's not getting passed, and I was grateful that we got those new SIVs last year, but there's just such a long way to go. And the AAA is what would bring protection to so many groups who really did serve alongside our people. And it would be the perfect.
And it will clear the pipeline, right?
We care.
It'll speed it up.
Sure.
It'll speed it up too. That's the way to go.
Is it going to be 9 months again, John? Because it was supposed to be 9 months for the SIV pipeline. And I don't know, by my calculations, we're just not there.
We'll get there. It's just a sabar. Like we gotta practice sabar. We gotta
patience. Yeah. Ask my friends and family how I am at that. That's not my strong suit. That's my mother. She did not pass that on to me.
I got it.
Well, I am so glad that we got to chat today, and I'm really heartened by the things that you're doing. And I'm glad that, you brought up things that, like I said, I've not heard of before, and I've not heard are happening before. So I think this is great. I'm hoping that other people will hear about them for the first time and want to do something and make a change and call some offices and say, hey, the way we're doing things isn't working. So thank you for coming on and sharing these great stories, difficult stories. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for the support of the community and the continued work you do. The voices that you give voice to people. And it's great. This was the first place I wanted to come. This is actually the first podcast I've come on to talk about Massachusetts Afghan. I wanted to get it further along, but I'm super happy for you and the support you give the community. So thank you so much.
Well, I am very appreciative of the kind words, and I will keep telling all the stories. People come to me with your stories. I want to tell them. Thank you to all our listeners, as always, for sharing your time and supporting the people of Afghanistan, the veterans who fought there, and all of the Afghans who are currently trying to resettle and dealing with some really serious things, really big, huge life changes and some trauma that they're still facing. Yeah, all the traumas. If you've enjoyed this episode, please make sure you're following the YouTube page and enabled notifications and all those good things so that you can hear about future content. Tasha Kaur, and I hope to see you again soon.
Thanks so much.